one's belief. We see that the Word was with God, and then we see that the Word was God. And that God came and dwelt, actually, with us, that we may behold His glory. And He died and resurrected so that we might have everlasting life. By the way, nothing can match that. No history can match this. Reading and pondering of these verses of this book of God is like experiencing grace after grace, like waves of the seas. One after the other, blessings after blessings, revelation after revelation. By the way, these words, grace after grace, is in chapter 1, verse 16. They are like a bank statement that one receives and finds out that his account is daily being filled, and the funds are there to be used. This verse reads like this: and of His fullness we have all received, and grace after grace. Here the word translated after means literally against or in place of. One grace is giving and another is there waiting to replace it. We're always being replenished as we respond to the call of God. By the way, we believers are spoiled. And most of us do not even know that. And what that tells us is that we are called to look forward and to anticipate great blessing as we walk with God. As we strive, by the way, to follow Him. By the way, what is grace? The Bible mentions grace some 170 times. And if there is any single word which is distinctively biblical, it is the word grace. The whole concept is framed with an undeserved quality, something which we believers have received, which we could not have merited, something which God chose to do simply because He loves us. Someone said about grace, he said, grace is everything for nothing to those who don't deserve anything. Just think about it. If God dealt with us according to truth, no one would be able to survive. And because of God's love, an unlimited amount of grace is given to you. And this grace is found where? The Bible says in His fullness. That is, it is found in Yeshua Himself. We were just told in verse 14 that the Word is full of grace and truth. And this is what we find in Yeshua. Truth and grace, and this we find it in abundance. Again, we remind ourselves that is of the reason why this book was written. John 20:31 says, but these things are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in His name. To have life in His name does not only mean to be saved, but to live with Him, to live according to His truth, to have life in Him and with Him. In fact, life is a key theme through the whole Gospel of John. It is used also some 36 times. In John 8:12, Yeshua says, I am the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but have the light of life. Being that fullness, Jesus is also portrayed as the water of life, remember. He's also portrayed as the manna of life, the bread of life. He is, by the way, life Himself, as John 14:6 says. I am the way, the truth, and what? He is the life itself. And so we are told right at the start that all this grace, all these benefits are offered to us on a continual basis. And it is my prayer today that we will be blessed by the words found in this gospel, and that we will experience and grow in grace to our God. Last week we have started to look at a true man of God, who was John the Baptist. You know, just prior to the first coming of the Messiah, John the Baptist appeared on the scene. His mission was to be what? A witness. He represented, in a way, that body of believers from those dispensation preceding us. As we read in Matthew 11:13, where Jesus says of him, He says, for all the prophets and the law prophesied until John. As if the Old Testament stopped with John the Baptist. In fact, he spoke of himself in John 3:29 as the friend of the bridegroom. The bridegroom was Yeshua. The bride was the new believers to come, the church. And friend of the bridegroom was at that time only an assistant who made arrangement for the ceremony. And so that was John's task, as he prepared many hearts to receive Yeshua. And his witness, by the way, ends in verse 34. It says, and I have seen and testified that this is the Son of God. How did he witness Jesus? First, his witness is seen in verse 19 to 27 as he testified to these religious leaders, those who were responsible to seek out the Messiah himself. In verse 19, we read, now this is the testimony of John, when the Jews sent priests and Levites from Jerusalem to ask him, who are you? During his witness, he was asked pertinent questions by the Sadducees and by the Pharisees because they could not make sense of who this man was. They asked him in verse 21, after that he denied being the Messiah, they asked him, what then, are you Elijah? He said, I'm not. Are you the prophet? And he answered, no. And in verse 25 also, the Pharisees came. And they asked him further question. He says, why then do you baptize if you are not the Christ, nor Elijah, or not the prophets? See, the Jewish leaders knew that Elijah was to come before the coming of the Lord. And this is according to Malachi, chapter 4, verse 5, which says, behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. He, in fact, comes before the second coming, being one of the two witnesses that we see in Revelation chapter 11, where we recognize one of them being Elijah. But he denied being Elijah, and according to the prophet Zechariah 13:14, a Messianic chapter, it is written that there will be many false prophets that will come and pretend to be prophets and dress like Elijah. And this is perhaps what the religious leaders were asking. They were wondering who actually he was. And we know that many false prophets came at the time of Jesus. Many of them also said that they were the Messiah. Why? Because the Jews, we know, expected the Messiah according to the prophecies of Daniel 9:23 to 27. So these leaders further asked him if he was the prophet. Who did they mean by the prophet? Who was this prophet? This was in reference to the prophet that Moses promised in Deuteronomy 18:15 to 19. This prophet was the Messiah himself. See what it says, verse 15. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from your midst, from your brethren, and him you shall hear. I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their brethren, and I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them all that I command him. So this prophet will be like Moses in a sense of fulfilling the office of prophets, priest, and king. But this special prophet would not be like any other prophets, including Moses, because of the divine authority vested in him. See what he says in verse 19. And it shall be that whosoever will not hear my words, which he speaks in my name, I will require of him. And this office of prophet was that what Yeshua, by the way, fulfilled here on earth. Right now he's fulfilling that office of priest. So the religious leaders, Pharisees and Sadducees, were not ignorant of the coming of the Messiah, nor were they ignorant of the coming of Elijah, which shows that they were deliberately denied Yeshua. But while John the Baptist said that he himself was not Elijah, Yeshua came with a startling statement. See in Mark 9:13 what he says. Referring to him, he says, but I say to you that Elijah has also come, and they did to him whatever they wished. How can we understand this statement? Well, if you are a post-millennialist or an amillennialist, there is no way you can properly interpret this passage, because this passage can be understood only if you properly divide the different time periods found in the scriptures. Something that many people just mix together and present you the gospel as one of those unrealistic pictures. I don't know if you know that toy, Mr. Potato, where you can put the eyes in the belly and the arms on the head and so on and so forth. And you can move everything around to fit one's own interpretation. These are, by the way, the replacement theologians, the one who want to do away with Israel and conclude that Israel today is an accident of history and that the church has replaced Israel. So how can we understand the statement that Jesus said in Mark 9:13? This is one of the first hints, by the way, of the mystery of the church, of the ecclesia that Paul speaks in Ephesians chapter 3. The mystery which revealed that the body of the Messiah was